I'm proudly to introduce to you Aaron Wright. He is a professor and director of the Cardozo School of Law, also the author of the book Blockchain and the Law, which is in quite much briefcases here I saw already. So I'm really glad to introduce you on stage and give him a warm applause, please.
So I think this fourth block, because we're, I guess, building on blocks here, is really looking at land registration and kind of some legal issues more generally. So I'm going to focus in the next 10 minutes just on this idea of using blockchains to kind of manage title to real property and some of the potential applications. There's lots of discussion related to this. Hopefully you can walk away with a little bit more balanced of understanding of what's available today and what may be coming. And I'm sure you've heard plenty of different formulations or analogies to kind of understand what blockchain technology does. I think the best way to really think about what at its core, kind of stripping away the hyperbolic marketing that often surrounds blockchains, is they're really great at keeping track of who owns what at what point in time. That's its fundamental value. And what that means is that blockchains can manage assets in a really novel and unique way. And the hypothesis is that over the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, not just virtual currencies like Bitcoin and Ether and these new tokens, which may be access to online services, will be managed via blockchain. Increasingly, more and more assets will be represented on a blockchain and managed via these systems. And the reason that we can do this is that blockchains are tamper-resistant, they're interoperable, they're globally accessible, they're resilient, and they have an auditable trail that comes with them. And I'm sure you've heard a bit about these smart contracts, which as a lawyer, it drives us mad because they're a little bit of a misnomer. But fundamentally, what does a smart contract do? It moves around these assets. So the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, more and more assets will be represented and managed via blockchain because it's a superior system to do that. And these little programs called smart contracts will begin to move them around. So what's the impact? So with the internet, the first wave of the internet, we basically turned letters into email, right? We turned natural language letters and had the ability for the first time to zip it across the globe. That was transformative. The ability to communicate instantaneously with any other person on the planet had a profound impact on how we structured society. Now we're taking something that's arguably more valuable than a communication, assets. And now we can transfer those assets around the globe in right now about 10 seconds on platforms like Ethereum. Over time, that's going to narrow down to minutes, milliseconds, nanoseconds. So assets will have the fluidity that we have with communications today. So assets effectively become email, right? If you want to zip around an asset, you'll be able to do that. And these smart contracts are really the tools that facilitate that. And what we're seeing is really this emerging commercial stack. And what I think this is going to be the blockchain stack. And many of these functions and roles we already have in society. So you have an asset management layer, effectively a property rights management layer. And then we're seeing middleware that gets developed, custody. So how do you secure and maintain and keep these assets safe? So right now, we don't really know how to build the bank vaults. Right? We don't know what that looks like. If I told you what a bank vault looks like today, you probably had some vision of like Mission Impossible, big steel doors, round levers, lots of buttons, maybe Tom Cruise. But in this world, we don't know that yet. We also don't know what the marketplaces fully look like. Are they going to be centralized? Are they going to be decentralized? Who's going to maintain them? That's still getting sorted out. But there's additional legal layers that are being also created. So the ability to take all this commercial paper that we have and we use to structure risk and manage risk, that's also getting converted into blockchain compatible systems. And the last one is, how do I attest? How do I sign something? So that you probably have heard a lot about identity and attestation. But it's this stack, this combination, this asset management layer with all this middleware that's emerging that will provide all these potential use cases that you've heard quite a bit about. So when you're thinking about, in terms of development, if you do not see these middleware layers built yet or secure, lots of those verticals will not be built, right? They're just impossible to do at this point in time. So folks are pushing towards that. That's exciting, but it's unlikely that that's going to be coming anytime soon. So this kind of stack does a couple of things that are really nice and will be particularly useful for streamlining how land gets managed, how title gets transferred. So if you have a legal layer where you can basically automate documents, you can manage contracts, you can attest to your identity and e-sign things, you can structure using smart contracts the way that these assets get transferred and thereby encode certain rules and restrictions and have automated compliance, and you can transfer them seamlessly, well, that's a much, much more efficient system. And that's really the hope and the possibility here. But with all that being said, it's still early days. I think someone on the last panel mentioned that. I call it the Kitty Hawk days, right? We're just getting into the air. We haven't built the jet. We haven't built the airports and all these other core pieces of infrastructure. And in many ways, governments are the ones that are going to build build and support this technology, particularly when it comes to land title. So a specific jurisdiction is the one and ultimate party that will determine who owns what. It's not a technology. It's going to be a government of some sort, a consortium of governments, and blockchains don't really solve that. So really public support is at its core what's going to be necessary for any of these land-related issues to emerge. There's also significant security risks, and this is often downplayed by blockchain enthusiasts. But if you're going to move not just a couple $100 billion worth of assets, which is significant, but trillions of dollars worth of assets onto a system, it's got to be much more secure than it is today. And we still don't have trust in these systems enough so that people put their most valuable asset, if they're landowners, on a blockchain and have that manage it. On top of it, there's still significant concerns with the ability of blockchains to actually control the information that goes into them. So just because you have a data structure doesn't mean that the data that's getting put in is accurate. It doesn't mean that you have a complete chain of title when it comes to property rights. There could be gaps. There could be issues. So there's still lots of nitty-gritty details that need to get worked out in order for blockchains to really tackle land use. And the last one is just general coordination or collective action problems, or that's what us legal academics or other academics would call them. In many senses, particularly in the US and other parts of the globe, property is maintained at a local level, not even at the state level. So you have all these different parties that are not incentivized to coordinate together. And sure, we could potentially use crypto economic systems to begin to narrow some of those coordination problems, but that's still pretty blue sky research and development. We're not completely confident that we're going to get to that point yet. So these are the challenges that folks are going to have to work out. But this is, again, where the government is probably going to be the driver here. A government can break through a collective action problem. A government can cause coordination in a disparate industry. And I think what also may not be apparent is that there's an incredible amount of innovation that's happening in places that you wouldn't expect it. So we're seeing, particularly in the Ethereum ecosystem, which now has about 250,000 developers building on top of this network, standards that emerge. Standards that are effectively modeling out property rights. So you may have heard of CryptoKitties, which is a little art/game project that became pretty popular last year. You can basically own and prove that you're the owner of a scarce digital asset, a CryptoKitty. That's really interesting. But when they basically built this technology and they relied on a token standard to do so, they modeled out a way to represent real property, intellectual property, a whole host of property that we have in the real world. So something that looks like a silly cat with a spinning Ethereum-inspired logo actually solved and brought into this world an ability to begin to represent property rights on a blockchain. And beyond that, because of all these folks online that are interested in buying, trading, selling, playing this game, they've begun to model out subrights. So we actually have in the Ethereum ecosystem the ability to not only represent a scarce asset on a blockchain, but also all the rights that may subtend to that scarce asset. So for example, and we've displayed this, and I won't have time to play it, but we're able now to represent real property on a blockchain, particularly on the Ethereum blockchain, and rights like rights of way, easement rights, air rights, they can all be cryptographically tied together and proven. So I work in conjunction with some of the folks at Consensus on a project called OpenLaw, where we're basically building a lot of this technology. So this is an example we worked with a law firm in Australia called Coors, where we demonstrated how we can represent title to real property in Australia on a blockchain. We can take a standardized residential land sale agreement. In this case, in Australia, they've standardized that. Parties can enter into that agreement. They can sign that agreement digitally. That can be managed via blockchain. All the information from that agreement can get ported into a smart contract that enables the buyer to post to a virtual escrow account his or her their deposit. A lender can provide its loan. That's cryptographically proven as correct, or when that's cryptographically proven as correct, the seller automatically receives payment and the title registry is automatically updated. So a task that today flummoxes many governments, takes a month or so to close, requires a host of different parties, lawyers, other folks to prepare the relevant documents. We're moving towards a world where all of that's unnecessary in large part. All that operational support becomes unnecessary if there's standardization around some of these agreements, particularly fairly basic agreements like the sale of land agreements, not necessarily the complex commercial transactions. We can see property transfer in 10 seconds, right? That's what we're talking about here, maybe 10, 20 seconds max. So instead of having 30-day settlement and closing time, we have 10-second settlement and closing time for property. And beyond that, this is universally accessible. So once one jurisdiction perfects it, it becomes potentially possible to scale it across the globe. So that reduces the need for redundant systems that governments maintain. And the third benefit is it's all interoperable at that point. So this system will be interoperable with other financial systems that blockchains are developing. So all this will begin to start seamlessly working together. So lots of interesting possibilities, lots of interesting problems, and that's what we're going to dive into in the next panel.